Hello, my name is Calvin Draper. I'm 34 years old, single, and I work as a doctor at Tenova Healthcare Harton in Toma, Tennessee. It's a quiet town tucked into green hills where the roads curl like ribbons and the evenings smell of rain and cut grass. I like it here. People nod at each other on sidewalks. Strangers hold doors. The coffee shop on Main Street plays old Motown in the mornings. It's not flashy, but life is softer around the edges. Today I'm sitting at my small kitchen table, sunlight laying stripes across my phone. A Facebook notification pops up, a memory from 16 years ago. A photo, me and my grandmother at the Atlanta airport, my arm around her shoulders, both of us smiling like the world was brand new. I was 18, tall and awkward, hiding behind a shaggy haircut. She was tiny, in her blue cardigan and white sneakers, snow-white hair tucked behind her ears, eyes crinkled up with joy. We looked happy. We were happy for a slice of a moment. Then the rest of the day happened, and the corners of that memory cut in like glass. I close my eyes. The old ache floats up, as if grief keeps its own clock and knows exactly when to ring. I tell myself this story isn't about blaming anyone. Maybe it is a little. Mostly it's about understanding how one moment can split a life into a before and an after. Before, I believed family meant safety. After, I learned it could mean silence. Even when the heart beats loud enough to break. I grew up in Greenville, South Carolina, where summer heat sticks to your skin and traffic fills every hour with noise. My father, Gordon, was an engineer, always bending over blueprints like they were sacred pages. My mother, Janelle, was an accountant who lived inside a kingdom of spreadsheets and deadlines. They were good at work, both of them, good at paying bills, polishing shoes, parking the car in a perfect line, good at asking me about grades at dinner. How were your finals? What's your class rank? And then nodding before I'd finished answering. Eyes back on the news or the day planner. It wasn't that they didn't care exactly. It's that our house felt like a place where feelings weren't practical. Like if you couldn't quantify it, it didn't belong on the table. I learned to keep my voice low and my footsteps quiet. I learned to talk about my future like a project timeline. But every summer I had a place where I could breathe, where I felt the kind of scene that warms your bones. My grandmother's house in Toma. Her name was Hazel Draper. Once upon a time, she was a nurse, the kind who knows what to do in a storm. The kind who feeds you crackers while she charts your vitals and remembers to ask how you slept. She raised my father and his sister, Paula, alone, with the kind of hard that leaves lines around your mouth but doesn't turn your eyes mean. In her little wooden house, mornings smelled like cinnamon and the faint bite of antiseptic. The floors creaked with history. The porch was full of flowers, pots of marigolds and tomatoes, mint in coffee cans. A trellis of beans climbing like they knew a secret. When I arrived each summer, she'd hug me so tight I felt my ribs. "Calvin," she'd say, stepping back to look me over, "you're growing faster than the weeds." I'd laugh. Because it was true, and because her laugh had that pure, delighted ring that made everything feel lighter. We'd bake cookies in her narrow kitchen, my elbows dusted in flour, her hip nudging the oven shut with practiced ease. We'd go to the farmer's market and the library and the tiny thrift store that smelled like pine cleaner and old pennies. Sometimes in the afternoons, she'd sit by the window, hands folded, staring past the trees like she was listening to a faraway radio. On the wall beside her, in a simple wooden frame, there was a photo of my father, my aunt, and me. She rarely talked about either of her children. The love was there, hanging in the air. But it was the quiet kind that doesn't know where to land. Aunt Paula married a man named Leon Mallister, who had a smile like a deal closing. They moved to Peachtree City, Georgia, where the golf carts have their own lanes, and everything feels like it just got power washed. They had 2 kids, Isabel and James, who wore coordinated outfits in family photos and smiled with small lips. We saw them at Christmas sometimes. There were nice gifts and nice words. And then everyone went home with their coats still smelling like someone else's house. When I was 18, the summer felt like a doorway. I'd just graduated high school. I'd been accepted to a pre-med program I could barely believe I had earned. The world was a wide, undefined light in front of me. That's the year my grandmother called and said, "Honey, I'm turning 70 in August. And I want my family to stand together with our feet in the ocean. I want us to look out at all that blue and remember we're small and big at the same time." She had been saving for years, she told us. Not for a new roof or a new car or a new kitchen. For a feeling. She wanted to take all of us, May, my parents, Aunt Paula, and Uncle Leon, my cousins in. A trip. A big one. "Let's do Hawaii," she said, almost shyly. "Let's do it while I can still walk the sand without needing a hand up." $30,000. That was the number. It sounded like a mountain. She had moved small hills to make it. The idea was insane and wonderful and very her. She said she would pay for everything: flights, hotel, rental cars, a luau, the works. "Don't tell me we shouldn't," she said, laughing when my father began to protest. "Tell me when to pack." My father didn't like the plan. He didn't like it so much you could see the tight in his jaw when my grandmother spoke. He said it was frivolous. He said she was being taken advantage of by travel agents. He said she could slip on a rock and break her hip. When he couldn't stop her with reason, he tried with logistics. "If we're doing it, I'll book it," he said. "I'll deal with the airline, the hotel, the car. I'll make sure we're not double charged for resort fees. Mom, if you're going to spend your savings, you're not going to get fleeced." She agreed, relieved to hand the reins to someone who liked reins. She transferred the funds to him in chunks. I remember her standing in our kitchen in Greenville, holding the paper receipt from the bank like it was a promise. "This is my gift," she said to the air, her eyes bright. "We're going to laugh so hard our stomachs hurt." The planning took weeks, emails, calls, a group thread where Aunt Paula posted links to must-try restaurants, and my mother replied with thumbs-up emojis. The date was set. The flights would be out of Atlanta because they were cheaper direct to Honolulu. The hotel had balconies and a pool shaped like a lagoon. My grandmother kept a little notebook where she wrote everything down with a pink gel pen: flight times, gate numbers, what to pack, who didn't like tomatoes. She stuck it in her purse and patted it like a passport. The night before we left, I slept in my old room in Greenville, my suitcase open on the floor. I packed shorts, t-shirts, a button-down for the fancy dinner, the novel my grandmother had given me. I packed a photo of us at her house the last summer, because I was sentimental and because the idea of us by the ocean made me feel electric. In the next room, my parents were arguing in low voices. I forgot enough of the exact words to call it noise, but I remember my father saying, "I'm not going to be made a fool of," and my mother saying, "Gordon, please," and my father's voice going flat in a way that always made me cold. We drove to Atlanta before sunrise. The highway was empty, the sky a deep blue that felt like a promise. My father drove like he was late to something important, even when he wasn't. My mother sat next to him, hands pressed between her knees, her lips holding a thought she didn't let out. In the back seat, I watched the trees go silver as light edged their leaves. I imagined the ocean, how it would sound like a long exhale. Hartsfield-Jackson was its regular chaos, suitcases rolling, departures board clacking, someone arguing about a carry-on that was really a suitcase with illusions. We met Aunt Paula and Uncle Leon near the big fountain, everyone hugging with the briskness of people checking boxes. My cousins looked like a catalog. Then my grandmother appeared, breathless and bright. In her blue cardigan and white sneakers, her small black suitcase rolling behind her like a faithful dog. She saw me, and her face lit like all the lamps in a room. "There he is," she said, her voice breaking into a laugh. "My boy." We took the photo. A woman in a Hawaiian shirt offered, saying, "Let me get all of y'all." We lined up. A little messy, a little awkward, my grandmother in the middle. From the outside, we looked like a dozen other families heading for adventures. It's weird, the things you can't see in a picture, the crack in the teacup, seam about to split. Check-in was a tangle. My father liked to operate like a foreman. He gave everyone jobs. "Paula, take Mom and the kids to that kiosk. Leon, watch the bags. Janelle, come with me to the counter." To me, he said, "Stay with the carry-ons, Calvin. Don't let the backpack out of your sight." He held a thick white envelope that he called the packet and treated it like it contained a heart transplant. When he was stressed, he spoke in clipped phrases and moved fast. He went to the agent. He showed the envelope. He spoke in a voice I knew, meant he wanted to win. I stood behind the suitcases and felt 10 years old. A few minutes later, my father returned. He motioned for me to step aside, away from the line, to a column where the flow of passengers split around us. "Calvin," he said, "eyes everywhere but on mine. I need you to listen." "Okay," I said, feeling something shift, like the floor had gone slick. "There's been a mistake," he said. His voice was colder than the air conditioning. "I forgot your ticket. It isn't in the envelope. It must be at the house." I stared. "What? But it's in a ticket, right? Don't they just look it up?" "They can't find your reservation," he said, the words neat as a typed memo. "And I don't have your confirmation number. We don't have time for this." My mouth went dry. "What do you mean you forgot my ticket?" His eyes cut to mine then, and for a second, I saw the thing beneath the words. The metal rod inside the spine of the lie. "I forgot your ticket," he said, slower, as if rehearsing it into something true. "Just go home." The words hit like a hand. I blinked, because the airport was too bright. "I can't just go home." "Grandma, don't cause a scene," he said, low, stepping closer. His cologne smelled sharp and expensive. "Your grandmother is stressed enough. I'll handle this. We'll rebook you for tomorrow, then. Let me talk to her. She needs to get through security," he said. Over his shoulder, I could see her, with Aunt Paula's arm around her, her face turned toward us. She lifted her hand, and I waved a small, instinctive gesture. She smiled, that sweet, sure smile, then turned back as Paula steered her toward the TSA line. "Calvin," my father said, and his voice had a razor in it. "Don't argue with me in public." "Dad, He leaned in, a whisper that came out like a command. "Go home. I'll call you from the gate. I'll fix it." He pressed a 20 into my hand as if that made it kindness, as if bus fare could fold the hurt into a paper crane. "Get the MARTA train then, Greyhound," he said. "Text your mother when you get to the house." I walked to the airline counter. My legs felt like screens that had lost their signal. I gave the agent my name, my birth date. She typed, eyes flicking between me and the screen like she was reading a pulse. "I'm not seeing you on this reservation," she said finally. She was kind in the way people are kind when they can't help. "Do you have a confirmation code?" I swallowed. "My dad booked it. If he added you, we'd see it," she said, almost apologetic. "Maybe you're on another flight. Or, is it possible he didn't?" I shook my head because the truth was a cliff and I was standing too near the edge. "He said he forgot my ticket," I heard myself whisper. And even as I said it, I could hear how it sounded out loud. Wrong. Not how flights worked. An excuse from another decade. The agent's eyes softened in the way strangers' eyes do when they recognize something they wish they didn't. "I'm sorry," she said. "I wish I could do more." I turned and scanned the lines for my grandmother. It was like trying to find a single firefly in a field. The crowd swallowed her. My father was already inching toward security with the rest of them, lifting a hand to me like a traffic cop. "Wait. Stop." He didn't look at me again. I stood in the middle of that airport and felt the old stories collapse. I kept seeing her smile in the photo we'd just taken, the one where everything still looked okay. I wanted to run to her. I wanted to shout. Instead, I picked up my backpack, and my legs carried me through the current of people. Away from the bright boards and the flowered shirts and the families with matching tags. On the MARTA train, I sat with my hands in my lap, my father's 20 folded small. People got on and off, dragging their lives. A toddler sang a song about popcorn. A man yawned like he was trying to shake his skeleton loose. I didn't cry until we were above ground again, and the sunlight hit me like a dare. I kept waiting for my phone to ring. It did, once my mother's name. When I answered, her voice was reedy, stretched thin. "You got on the bus?" She asked. "I'm on the train," I said. "What happened?" "We'll fix it," she said. "Just try to rest. Your dad will call." "Does Grandma know?" She's boarding, my mother said. Then, a breath. We'll talk later, honey, okay? I sat in the Greyhound terminal for a long hour. With its old tile and stale air and the kind of lighting that makes everyone look tired, a boy my age was arguing softly with his girlfriend about whether love means answering every text. An elderly man asked me to watch his bag while he went to the restroom. I nodded. I watched it like it was a job, something simple I could do right. The bus to Greenville groaned and sighed and shivered its way out of Atlanta. And I stared out the window and watched the sky go from bright to gray to the particular gold of late afternoon when you can see.
Dust.
Inside the light. When I unlocked the front door of our house, the quiet came at me like a wall. My mother had left a casserole in the fridge with a sticky note on top. Eat, please. I wasn't hungry. I sat on the bottom step inside the door and thought about calling my grandmother. My thumb hovered over her name. I put the phone down because I was afraid of the sound she might make when she found out. I stepped into the living room, took the framed picture of the three of us from the bookcase, and carried it back to my room. I set it on my dresser and lay down with my arm over my eyes. I don't remember sleeping. I remember the house dimming around me, and the crickets outside coming on like 1,000 small clocks. Around 10, my phone buzzed. Calvin? It was her. Even across 6,000 miles and layers of digital noise, I could feel the way she put her hand around your name when she said it. Grandma. Sweet boy, she said. Her voice soft and braced, like she was holding something heavy. Are you in Greenville? Yes. Are you okay? I swallowed because the word okay felt complicated. I'm home. There was a small sound, like the beginning of a sob she refused to let out. Your father told me at the gate that you had an upset stomach, she said, the words deliberate. He said you wanted to go home and rest. He said you'd fly tomorrow with him and join us here. I wanted to go, I said. And the tears came then, hot and humiliating and freeing. I wanted to go so bad. The wind on her end of the line made a soft rush, like she had walked onto the balcony. I know you did, she said. I saw your face. I saw you waving at me. Calvin, honey, did he? What did he tell you? He told me he forgot my ticket, I said, and tried to laugh at the stupidity of the sentence, but it broke in my throat. He said to go home. Silence. The kind that opens like a tunnel and you can feel yourself falling. When she spoke again, her voice was steadier. I'm going to call the airline. You don't have to. I'm going to call, she said. And her nurse voice came back, the one that brooked no nonsense. Then I'm going to call your father. I'll call you right back. I sat there on my bed staring at the dark window, where my own face looked back older somehow, like I'd been walking in bad weather and came home wet. 20 minutes later, my phone rang again. Calvin. Yeah. There wasn't a ticket for you, she said. She said it carefully. The way you deliver a diagnosis. They have reservations for your parents. For Paula and Leon. For the kids. Not for you. Somewhere in the house, the refrigerator kicked on. An ugly little hum that felt suddenly too loud. He told me he booked it, I said, though I wasn't sure whether I was speaking to her or to the ceiling. I gave him the money to book it, she whispered. And for the first time the anger bled into her voice. I gave him my savings, Calvin. I broke my piggy bank and handed him the pieces and said, build us something. And she stopped, like she was reminding herself to breathe. I'm going to talk to him. Right now. The call came 15 minutes later, and it was a three-way that didn't bother with pretense. My father's voice was a closed door. Mom, he said, this isn't the time. It's exactly the time, she replied. And there was a steel in her I had seen only once before. When she'd yanked a splinter from my finger and told me to look at her instead of at the wound. You didn't buy Calvin a ticket. I told you there was a mix-up, he said, very irritated, like someone put on hold too long. They oversold the flight. I spoke to the airline, she said. There was no reservation in his name. Not on any flight. Did you think I wouldn't call? You're blowing this out of proportion. He can come tomorrow. You told him to go home, she said. And the quiet after felt like the bell that rings at the end of a long fight. You sent my grandson home from an airport you and I stood in together to go on the trip I paid for, and you told him to go home. It's my family. Mom, he said, the words full of something old and ugly. I will not be made a fool of by your theatrics. This was my gift, she replied. Not your stage. Why? He was silent long enough that I imagined him looking out at Honolulu lights and choosing which version of himself to be. We couldn't afford to take care of him in Hawaii, he said then, blunt. He's 18. It's not a playground. He's going to be gone soon anyway, off at college. You wanted to waste $30,000 on a vacation while he's about to rack up debt for a degree he doesn't even know he'll finish? That money was for this, she said softly. For us. I trusted you. Then you were foolish, he snapped. And I could picture the set of his mouth, the pinch in his eyes. I handled the logistics the way I saw fit. You took my trust, and you cut my family with it, she said. And I had never heard her voice shake like that. You owe your son an apology. I owe no one anything, he said. This conversation is over. The line clicked. The quiet was so big, I could hear the blood in my ears. Calvin, she said. And now, she sounded tired in a way I had never known her to be. I am so sorry, it's okay, I said. The way people say things that are not okay, because they don't know where to put the flood. Go see the ocean. I want to fly home, she said, and I heard the slam of a sliding door, the scrape of a chair. I want to be there with you. Don't, I whispered. You wanted this? You saved for it. Please go. See it for me. Tell me what the water looks like. She was quiet for a breath. It looks like all the promises humans have ever made, she said softly. It looks like something that was here before us and will be here after us. And it makes the part in the middle, this part, feel smaller. I'll tell you everything. And when I get back, you and I will go too. If I have to sell my sofa, I'll sell my sofa. She didn't sell her sofa. She came home with a shell in her pocket, and anger like a mineral in her bones. She hugged me until I felt steadied. We stood in her kitchen in Toma, with our foreheads together, and I felt the world tilt back into a place where gravity applied. She put a map on the table and poked Tybee Island with her finger. We'll drive, she said. We'll stay in a motel that smells like bleach and old carpet. We'll buy sandals at a gas station, and we'll eat sandwiches on the sand. I'm not waiting for anyone's permission to watch you see the ocean. We went the next weekend. It wasn't Hawaii. It didn't need to be. The Atlantic was green, gray, and wild, choppy in the afternoon wind. The first time the water covered my feet and the sand slid out from under me like a joke, I laughed, the kind of laugh that shakes other laughter loose. She stood knee-deep, her capri pants soaked, her hair making little question marks on her forehead, and she held my hand like it was a kite string, and I was the kind of boy who might float away. On the drive back to Toma, the car smelling like salt and sunscreen and fast food fries, she told me things she had kept between her ribs for too long. She talked about my grandfather, whose temper was a switchblade. She talked about leaving him with 2 kids and a paycheck that felt like a dare. She talked about how my father had learned to build a life where nothing could tip if you never took your hands off the edge. He got so good at control, he forgot how to share, she said, not unkindly. I didn't say much. I watched the highway and the slow muscle of a cloud and the way pine trees blur into walls. I thought about how love could be so fierce it became a fortress, and how sometimes a fortress turns into a prison. I thought about the way my father had looked at me when he said, I forgot your ticket. Just go home. I thought about how the weakest lies are the ones we tell with a straight spine. That fall, I left for college. My father's version of things kept shape-shifting. The airline messed up. I misunderstood. I had refused to go. My mother floated between us like a small boat between 2 bigger ones, trying not to be crushed. I went to class. I worked nights in the library. I called my grandmother every Sunday, then on Thursdays too, because the week was too long for just one phone call. In my anatomy lab, the first time I held a heart wrapped in gauze, I thought of hers and how it had stretched and not torn. I wish I could say my father, and I found our way back to something easy. We didn't. The thing at the airport had been a curtain pulled back, and behind it was the machinery of how he moved through the world. He resented the way my grandmother loved me. He resented the way I looked at the world and wanted to step into it without a ledger. He resented the way that trip made him look like a man who couldn't keep his story straight. I learned to keep my visits home brief. When he spoke to me in a voice that tried to make me smaller, I learned to leave the room and breathe air that hadn't been used already. Time is a strange animal. It kept going, even when I wanted it to stop on certain days and start over on others. I graduated. I moved back to Toma for my residency at the hospital, partly because a slot opened at the right time, partly because I wanted the town that held my grandmother to hold me to. One rented the apartment over the hardware store with the slanted floor. On weekends, I mowed her grass. And she made a pitcher of lemonade that tasted like July. We watched game shows at night and shouted answers like it mattered. Sometimes she fell asleep with her head on my shoulder, and I felt like a little boy who had found his way back to a sofa he hadn't realized he'd missed. She got sick the way old lamps dim slowly, then all at once. It wasn't dramatic. It was a little swelling. It was a little shortness of breath. It was her sitting down halfway through washing dishes and saying she needed a minute. Tests. A scan. Words like heart failure that try to sound like they know what they're doing. She looked at me and smiled like she didn't want me to worry. "I've been beating a long time," she said. "Don't you think it's okay for me to rest?" I took time off when I could. I took her to appointments and carried her purse. In the car, she insisted on being DJ. She played Patsy Cline and the Supremes, and that one song about a crazy little thing called love. We drove through our town like tourists of our own, passed by the square where she'd danced once, by the diner where she'd served coffee after night shifts because she needed to feel the day, a week before she died. She handed me an envelope and told me not to open it until after. "It's not dramatic," she said, laughing with her eyes. "It's just housekeeping." She slipped tiredly in sleep one afternoon with the sunlight touching her hand. I was sitting beside her reading the same sentence in a book over and over. When the nurse came in and the machines made their soft, tired noises, I put my book down and took her hand. It was warm, and then it wasn't. That's a fact nobody tells you, how the warmth travels out of a person slowly, like light leaving a room. After the service, a little chapel with wooden pews that looked polished by generations of backside. Went home and opened the envelope. Inside was a note written in pink gel pen and a photocopy of something official. The note said, "I don't want you to worry about where you'll plant your feet. The house is yours. Not because of what your father did or didn't do, because you are my home as much as it is. Love, Grandma." The photocopy was her will. She had left the house to me and a little money. She had left my father some of her cookbooks and a letter that I didn't read. She had left Aunt Paula a box of jewelry and the recipe for her chocolate cake. She had made decisions that would make dinners awkward for a few years. She had done what she did best, set a table and laid out the places as she saw fit. A month after, Father stood in my apartment with his hands back in his pockets, like they were heavy and needed holding. He looked around as if the walls had something to say. "You think you won," he said finally, and I realized that's how it had existed in his mind. As a game. There wasn't a game, I said gently. There was a woman who loved us both and made a choice. "You poisoned her against me," he said. He said it like he believed it, and maybe he did. Some men will chew a lie for so long it starts to taste like bread. "She loved you," I said, "even when you made it hard." He met my eyes, and something there flickered. Maybe a memory. Maybe a version of himself he didn't like to see. He looked away first. "Enjoy your victory lap," he said. And he walked out into the hallway like a man stepping onto a stage he no longer liked. It took time for the anger to leak out of me, for the heat to become a warmth I could carry without burning. People like to say forgiveness is clean and clear, a bell. For me, it was a messy drawer I kept rummaging through, trying to find the right piece. Sometimes I took out a memory and held it up to the light, and sometimes it bit me. Sometimes I put it back and closed the drawer and went for a walk. On a Wednesday in late spring, my phone offered me that airport photo again. 16 years to the day. For a moment, it felt like someone had tugged a string tied to something under my ribs. I went to the porch and sat on the steps. The sky over Toma was the blue of a swimming pool, the air sweet with cut grass. Somewhere, a kid was riding a bike and whooping down a hill. I looked at our faces in that picture and thought about the moment after. It's a hard turn. If you're waiting for the part where my father calls me and says he's sorry, you might be waiting a long time. He's a man who believes that apologies are an admission he might not be the hero of his own story. And that's a hard belief to let go. He texted me on my last birthday, a careful line about hoping I was well. I replied with a picture of the garden at my grandmother's, the tomato plants going crazy in their cages. He didn't respond. Maybe that's our language now, a set of misconnections. Maybe that's okay. Not every door has to swing wide to let light into a room. Sometimes on my lunch break, I sit in the hospital courtyard, where a small fountain makes a sound like a secret being told over and over. I watch the old men shuffle by with their 4 poles, the nurses laugh in huddles, the med students trying to stand like they're not tired. I think about my grandmother, how she would have loved this place. A small hospital full of small miracles and big patients. I think about that trip she tried to give us, the money she folded her working life into. It still makes me angry sometimes, how someone could bend a gift like that until it broke. But more often now, what I feel is the light that came after the day she pulled me into a car and drove me to the edge of the country. Because she refused to let someone else decide what we saw last month, I took my cousins, Isabel and James, to Tybee. They're older now. Their edges softened by life and time and 1,000 small apologies they've learned to say and accept. We stood ankle deep and let the water pull at us. I told them the story because stories don't heal when you hide them. I told them about the photo and the line and the lie and the way our grandmother turned it into a different ending. James cried, simple and it hurt, and then laughed because I handed him a tissue like a doctor on a TV show. Isabel picked up a small shell and put it in my palm. "So we don't forget the ticket," she said, and it was perfect. The way she made a joke that held a kindness. I'm not 18 anymore. I know now that people forget because they want to forget. And sometimes because remembering would require them to be someone else. I know that money is love congealed, and you have to warm it up to pour it out right. I know that a house can be a person, and a person can be a house. And that when one goes, the other can shelter you anyway. Tonight. When I lock the clinic doors and the town is a soft row of quiet windows, I'll walk home under a sky that is not the Hawaiian Ocean, but holds a piece of it because light is light wherever it goes. I'll pass the coffee shop where they'll bake cookies early tomorrow, the ones that smell like every morning at my grandmother's. I'll stand in the yard behind her house, where the marigolds still flare like little suns, and I'll listen to the wind comb through the leaves. Somewhere, a plane will hum across the dark. I'll lift my head as if I could see it, as if I could ask it its destination. And I'll say out loud, just to hear it in the air, I didn't go home. I didn't go home when he told me to. I found my way somewhere else. Asterisk. The first call after that photo surfaced wasn't from my father. It was from Aunt Paula, 2 nights into their time in Honolulu. The kind of hour that makes a phone light look like a small lighthouse on a kitchen table. I stepped out onto my porch. The cicadas were practicing their metallic choir. Across the street, Mr. Willis's television flickered blue against his curtains. When I answered, there was surf in the background, and the sound of someone opening sliding glass doors, and then Paula's breath, which always sounded like she'd just finished saying something she'd been trying not to say for a long time. Her voice was careful. "I'm here," I said. "Okay." She let out a sigh that pushed a whole suitcase of words through the line. I'm on the balcony. Leon's asleep. The kids are trying to stay awake to watch a movie. Your grandmother, she's sitting on the bed with the TV on mute like it's a fish tank. I wanted to talk to you without anybody turning their head. I leaned against the porch rail. The paint needed a touch-up. I could feel it rough under my palm. "Tell me." "I believed your dad at the gate," she said. And I could hear that she hated the sentence and herself for having to say it. "He told us you were sick." He did it with that tone he uses. "You know, Finnell." I thought, okay, stomach bug, he's 18. He'll come tomorrow. Then Mom went quiet in that way. That means she's not going to be quiet for long. I'm sorry you're in the middle of this. No, baby, she said, and I could hear a small smile. She called everyone baby, but with me it always softened the space between us. This isn't your middle. This is a hurricane your daddy brewed in his own kettle. Tonight at dinner, Mom looked at him and asked for the confirmation number. Right there between the teriyaki and the coconut rice. He started talking about the luau time and how he heard the fire dancer is the best on Oahu. What did she do? She took out that pink notebook, Paula said, almost laughing despite herself. And she wrote down the lie right beside the truth. Then she went to the front desk and called the airline and came back with thunder in her eyes. Your daddy told her she was embarrassing him. I told him to be grateful that embarrassment was all he'd be feeling if he didn't start talking to his son like he was a person. I could picture at the restaurant's bamboo chairs, the little paper umbrellas, my grandmother's cardigan folded over the back of her chair. He's not going to admit he did this on purpose. No, Paula said. He's not. But here's me telling you, I'm sorry. For believing him at first. For getting on the plane when I should have asked more questions. For all the times I let your dad play me like he was doing some noble act when he was just tired of somebody else getting a slice of attention. We listened to the ocean together for a few heartbeats. I said, how are the kids? Mad at the right person for once, she said, a grim little pride in it. Isabel asked if we could buy you a ticket ourselves with the money Leon spends at the golf shop. James asked if your dad has always been like this, and I told him he's always been Gordon. It's not the same thing, but it's close. Paula, I said, have fun if you can, okay? For Grandma, we're going to take her to watch the sunrise at the beach tomorrow, she said. And her voice turned soft, the way it always did when she talked about her mother, not with the weight of being her daughter, but with the weight of having been her child. She told me she feels foolish for having wanted this. I told her fools don't save for a decade to buy their family a memory. Fools hang on to their pride like it's a parachute and then wonder why they break both ankles when they hit the ground. The line went quiet. Behind her, I heard a whistle that might have been a gecko or one of those hotel room fridges settling. She said, when we get back, I'm coming to Toma first. Your daddy can drive himself to Greenville. You don't have to pick a side, honey, she said softly. Sometimes not picking is picking the side of whoever already took. I love your father. He's my brother. But I don't have to love all the things he does to protect whatever soft thing is left inside him. The second call came later that same night. It was my mother. From the echo, I could tell she was in a bathroom, the big mirror. The too bright light, the quiet where a person goes to be alone on a family trip. I could hear the hum of the fan. Calvin, she said barely above a whisper. I'm here, I said, and sat down on the porch step, the wood warm from the day. I'm sorry. I didn't know what to do with the words. I set them on the step beside me like a glass that might spill if you weren't careful. For what? I asked gently. Sometimes people need your help walking all the way to the thing they're trying to say. I knew, she said. The words rushing out like she'd been holding her breath and couldn't do it anymore. He told me the night before. Not in so many words. He said, we can't take him. It will become a spectacle. Mom will make it about those two. And I asked who those two were, and he wouldn't say, and I knew he meant you and your grandmother. He said he'll be fine. He's 18. He can't have everything. I should have. The fan rattled a little above her head. I should have dragged you to the airline counter. I should have made a scene. The porch light drew moths. They cast frantic shadows. Why didn't you? I was afraid of what he'd do, she said, and then, softer, and what he would do to me. It's not with his hands, but with the way he can make a room unlivable, just by sitting still in it. I told myself we'd fix it tomorrow. I told myself you'd still get your ocean. That I wouldn't lose my husband over a week in Hawaii. You wouldn't have lost him, I said, and I believed it. Men like my father don't go because you push back once. They go because they built a dock that only holds their boat. I'm your mother, she said. And I heard her start to cry those small, neat tears she always tried to keep tidy. That should have counted for more. I wanted to reach through the miles and put my hand on her shoulder the way I sometimes did when I was 8. and she was hunched over a spreadsheet late at night. "You called me," I said. "That counts for something. What if it's too late to count?" She asked, and that was the truest question she'd ever asked me. "It isn't," I said. When they came back from Hawaii, the photos bloomed on social media like flowers in an arrangement, vivid, pretty, a little secondhand. In most of them, my grandmother stood slightly off-center, like even in joy she left room for others. In one, she was holding a paper cup of shaved ice, the color of a stoplight. In another, she was standing in front of a cliff that looked like it had opinions. There was also a picture someone else took, maybe a kind stranger, maybe a hotel photographer. It was the whole group. My grandmother looked right at the camera like she was making a contract with whoever held it. My father's smile didn't touch his eyes. My mother's did, a little trying. There was a space in the lineup that anyone could look at and not notice. But I noticed, because I knew where I would have stood. The day after they flew home, my grandmother's car pulled into my driveway. She climbed out slow, that careful way she had when her hips were tired. I met her halfway down the walk. She handed me a small cloth bag that someone had screen printed with a hibiscus. "For me?" I asked, because sometimes it's nice to play along. "For us?" she said, and her smile broke the stiffness in my chest. "A shell, a handful of sand. And something that looks like a pebble but is actually a piece of glass, the oceans. It's been arguing with for years." We sat at the table and spilled the bag like children stealing treasure. The sand had a different feel than Tybie's, a little finer, like a secret kept smooth. The sea glass was the pale green of old Coke bottles. She touched everything like a blessing. "How was it?" I asked. "It was beautiful, and it was wrong," she said. "Both things can live in the same box." We watched the sunrise together, and I thought about how many mornings I could have had. If I had married a different life at 22, then I thought about you and decided to stop counting the kind of math that makes you miss the present. We looked at the shell's spiral and listened to nothing for a while. She took out her pink notebook and flipped to a page. She had written down the name of a man in Honolulu, an attorney who'd told her what he could and couldn't do. She had written down flight numbers and confirmation codes and one line in bigger, firmer letters. "Don't ask him to change. Ask yourself what you can change." Under that, in smaller letters that I recognized as the ones she used when she was writing to herself as a friend, "Start with the will." "I don't want the world to think I did this to get anything," I said quietly. "I know," she said. "The world doesn't know the right things most days. You can't change the whole world, baby. You can change your house." The only formal meeting we ever had about the trip happened 2 weeks later. At my grandmother's kitchen table. If you've never watched a family try to rearrange its pieces in the same room as a pot of coffee and a plate of cookies, I don't recommend it unless you like theater that ends with someone standing in the yard for air. It was a Saturday. The heat had that heavy, lat summer feel. My father arrived in a collared shirt and an expression like he was there to inspect a bridge. My mother's hair was pulled back too tight. Aunt Paula wore jeans and a t-shirt from a local charity 5K. Her armor always a joke on her chest. Leon stood like a man who held his wife's purse when she asked him to and never made a scene about it. My cousin stayed in the living room watching cartoons with the sound low. My grandmother put the coffee on. She laid out mugs like places in church. She sat down and folded her hands and looked at my father. "You left my grandson at the airport," she said. No preamble. No words to spike or soften it. He leaned back. He had the right to be comfortable. It was his default. "Mom," he said, and a whole life fit into the one syllable. "We've gone over this." "We haven't gone over anything," she said. "We touched the edges. Now we're going to walk the whole field." He looked at me. I looked back. I wasn't angry the way I had been. I was tired and the kind that settles in your knees. "It was my decision," he said, "and I'll give him this. He didn't lie here. I didn't buy his ticket." "Why?" she asked. He took a breath like it was costing him. "Because I didn't want to watch you to turn my trip into a performance about your special. It bond." He said it so flatly I didn't register the cruelty at first. He called it his trip. He called the thing that raised me for the months that mattered a performance. I felt a hot flush creep up my neck and stopped it with my teeth. "You took my money," she said. "You took my hope, which is more expensive than money. I used your money to give the family a trip of a lifetime, not the whole family," Paula said. Her voice the low, warning kind she used with her kids when they were about to knock over a display in a store. "There were other costs," he said sharply, turning to her. "There were fees." "There were," Leon cleared his throat. "There were upgrades," he said, not unkind. "You booked Ocean View suites when the garden views would have been fine. You rented a Suburban when a sedan would have done. You didn't ask Mom if that's how she wanted it spent?" My father's mouth pressed thin. "Is this the part where the rich son-in-law lectures me about my choices?" Leon didn't take the bait. "No. This is the part where we say out loud the math that didn't add up." My grandmother was watching my father. Not with condemnation, but with a kind of deep curiosity, like she was trying to understand the species of animal he had grown into. "What else?" she asked softly. "Tell me the rest of the truth while you're already halfway across the line." He rubbed his temple. For a second I saw a boy who had been told to hold too much and believed he could if he clenched hard enough. "My firm had a cash flow problem," he said finally. "A client delayed payment? He exhaled. "I used a piece of your transfer temporarily to cover the payroll while I waited. I intended to put it back. I thought I could squeeze the trip costs in a way that would make it work." "You robbed Peter to pay Paul," Paula said, "and then you left Peter at gate B3. "I made a choice under pressure," he snapped. "I didn't think my mother would stand up at the airport and try to unman me in front of my wife and children." "I didn't stand up," my grandmother said. "I asked where my grandson's place was in the plan I paid for. You told me his place was home." He put his hands on the table, palms down, a man about to push himself away from a conversation. "I'm not apologizing for managing a difficult situation. No one asked you to manage us," Paula said. "We asked you to do what you said you'd do." My mother had been quiet. She looked small in her chair, like someone had sketched her in pencil and forgot to fill her in with color. "I'm sorry," she said, and she looked at me and didn't look away. "I'm sorry I didn't stop it." My father shot her a look that carried years of rules. She held it. It was the bravest thing I'd ever seen her do, and it happened with a chin lift most people would have missed. My grandmother stood. She reached into a drawer and took out an envelope and set it in the center of the table. "This is a copy of my new will," she said. "I'm not doing this to be dramatic. I'm doing it because when a storm hits, you check your roof. The house goes to Calvin. He lives here in this town. He mows my grass. He picks the marigolds before they get leggy." She smiled at me and then sobered. "Gordon, you will always be my son. I will always love you. But I won't hand you a matchbook and keep wondering why the curtains smell like smoke." My father laughed then. A harsh, quick sound that had no joy in it. "There," he said. "We're done here." He stood and left, the door swinging behind him with that finality doors love to perform. My mother stayed sitting. Her hands were shaking. She reached for a cookie and didn't take one. Paula reached across and took my mother's hand, and that, more than anything, felt like a new country drawn on an old map in the years that followed. Things moved in ways you'd expect and ways you might not. Aunt Paula and I grew close the way to people in the same lifeboat do. She visited Toma more. She'd show up with a casserole and a bag of thrift store finds, and a story about a woman in line who'd cut someone off and then apologized for the next 5 minutes until everyone was in love with her. Sometimes she came alone. Sometimes she brought the kids. When she brought the kids, we made pancakes on Sundays and went to the flea market and haggled over a mirror with a crack running through it that made everything look a little like itself and a little like a dream. My mother started calling me more. At first it was small things. Did I remember to change the air filter in my car? Was I eating protein? Had I looked at that form she mailed? Then it was bigger things that I think she should take a bookkeeping job part-time. Did I think she could handle working in a small office where the boss said family too often? Did I think she could learn to sleep alone eventually? My father and she didn't divorce then. They didn't even separate. You would have had to sit with her at the kitchen table and watch the way she held her mug to notice the shift. She stopped saying your dad and started saying your father, And then sometimes she started saying Gordon when she was tired enough not to care how it sounded. Once, she drove up to Toma by herself. She parked in front of my grandmother's house and sat in the car for a full minute, hands on the steering wheel like she was bracing for impact. When she came in, she hugged me with both arms, and it felt like she was trying to climb into a new body where she could be herself. Without checking the weather forecast of someone else's mood, we went to the farmer's market. She held a bunch of carrots up like flowers. She laughed. She cried a little in the car and wiped the tears away and said, "If I'd met your grandmother as a friend, would I have had the courage that day?" And then didn't wait for an answer. I didn't see my father much. He lived his life the way he always had, with lists and rules and a professional tone that never went away, even when he was off the clock. When we spoke, the conversation started at level 3 and never moved. One Thanksgiving, we all tried. We drove to Paula's in Peachtree City. The table was too long, the food was too good. The kids were big enough to have opinions, and everything felt like a play we hadn't rehearsed enough times. Halfway through the meal, my father put his fork down and said, "Are we going to pretend the last 10 years haven't been one long tantrum?" He didn't say who the tantrum belonged to. He didn't need to. The words sat there, sticky and wrong. My grandmother cleared her throat. She was already shrinking a little by then, the way age scoops you out from the inside. "It isn't a tantrum," she said. "It's grief with no polite clothes left to wear." We all stared at our plates. Later, after the pie, when the football game hummed in the background like a low-grade argument, my father sat beside me and said, "You think you understand what I did?" And I said, "I understand what I felt," and he shook his head at that, pitying, as if feeling were a hobby, not a discipline. On the drive back to Toma, my grandmother fell asleep with her head on my shoulder, and I decided not to try so hard to convince anyone of anything that night. Work has a strange way of stitching. Holes you didn't know were torn. In residency, there was a boy who came in with a broken arm and a father with a voice like a slammed door. The boy kept saying, I'm okay," and his eyes said he didn't know if that was true anymore. While we were setting the bone, I told him about a man I knew who bought a beautiful house that turned out to be built on clay, and how nobody told him the ground moved until he noticed the cracks, and how sometimes the best thing you can do is shore up what you can and move your favorite chair closer to the center of the room. He looked at me like I had said something wise. I had only said something honest. My grandmother's dying happened the way I told you, the slow dimming. The music in the car, the note with the pink pen. After the funeral, people brought casseroles and flowers and the right words and the wrong words. My father stood near the door like he was posted at a checkpoint. When he saw the line in the will about the house, he didn't shout. He didn't argue. He put his hands in his pockets and said, "Of course," and I wished he would have at least dropped something and let it break so I could see it in pieces and know it had been whole once. A week after she passed, a brown envelope arrived at my apartment, addressed in the careful script of a lawyer's assistant. Inside were copies of letters my grandmother had asked to be sent to each of us. Mine you already know. My father's I read only because he left it on my porch in the rain, and when I found it, the ink had bled at the edges. And I took that as permission, or maybe as an instruction from a woman who knew which truths could live with light on them. Gordon. It began because she never called him son in letters. I didn't love you because you made good choices. I loved you because you were mine. That love survived your father's temper and your teenage fury, and every time you looked at me like I was a mirror you didn't like to check. It will survive what you did at the airport. I hope you learn to forgive the little boy in you who thinks control is the same as safety. It isn't. Control is a gate you build and call a fence, and it keeps out the same people who came to bring you cool water. My last wish for you is that you put the matches away. The curtains can smell like coffee and cinnamon again if you let them. Your mother. I left that letter on the table with a weight to keep it from curling. That night, my father called. He didn't mention the letter. He wanted to talk about property taxes. I listened. I told him the due date. I said thank you when he said he'd cover them this year, even though I could have covered them myself. Sometimes, letting someone do something small is the only way to keep the bigger things from exploding. the thing that started to change us wasn't forgiveness or an apology. It was a blood vessel in his brain. 2 winters after my grandmother died, my father had a minor stroke. He was in his office, reaching for a file on a high shelf, when his right arm didn't do what arms are supposed to do. He had a headache he'd been calling annoying for a week. He sat down on the carpet and told himself a story about how he was just tired. A secretary found him 15 minutes later, his speech slurred, the right side of his mouth drooping like a curtain that had lost its hook. The ambulance took him not to my hospital, but to the one in Greenville. My mother called me from the parking lot, her voice taut with the terror of someone whose fear had finally raised its hand. "They said it's small," she said. "They said he's lucky." I drove down that night. The highway was a black ribbon thrown over the hills. In the hospital, the smell was the same as anywhere bleach. Old coffee, rubber gloves. My father was in a semi-private room. He'd never shared anything if he could help it. This felt like karma playing a small joke. He looked smaller. It's something illness does to certain men. It rearranges the scaffolding they build around themselves. His eyes were clearer, maybe because he couldn't keep all the shields up at once. "Calvin," he said, and the right corner of his mouth lagged a beat. "You came." "Of course I did." I said, "I thought you'd tell yourself a story about how this is what I get." "That's not how stories end in my head," I said. "At least, not the ones I want to live in." He nodded, and the movement was uneven, like a boat in a slight swell. The neurologist came and explained the scan. The little white blossom in the left hemisphere, the meds, the resting, the rehab. When we were alone again, my father looked at his hands like they belonged to someone he'd known in college and lost track of. "I can't grip the pen with this one," he said, lifting his right hand and letting it fall back. It was the closest to fear I had ever heard in his voice. "It will come back," I said. "We'll make it come back." He put his head back against the pillow. The room hummed. We listened to the sound like it was a radio station that only played one slow song. "Do you think I'm a monster?" he asked suddenly. "I think you're a person," I said, "which is worse some days." He smiled crooked, but there. The laugh that followed was dark and surprisingly gentle. "I used the money to make payroll," he said, as if we'd been discussing it a moment ago. I didn't want to say so because it sounded like an excuse, and because I didn't want my mother to know that her son couldn't balance his books as well as she thought. "She knew," I said softly. "She always knew, the way that people who count pennies for decades can smell when one goes missing." He looked at the ceiling. "I thought I'd put it back. I thought I'd be clever." It started with a week. Then it became until the invoice clears. Then it became next quarter. Every tomorrow makes a good thief. "You could have told her," I said. "I could have," he said. He turned his head and looked at me. There was water in his eyes that wasn't just tears. "I took the version of you that loves a woman, though. A version of me that's supposed to love you more than I love my pride. I put him in a seat marked standby. I can explain. Why until the day I die, and it won't change the picture." We sat with that. The afternoon deepened into that hospital time that feels like it belongs to no clock. He said, "Your grandmother wrote me a letter?" "I know," I said. "I read it in the kitchen," he said. "I read it while the coffee maker was telling me how long it had been since I cleaned it. I thought about lighting it on fire. I thought about framing it. Instead, I put it in a drawer with the warranty documents for appliances I don't own anymore." "Sounds right," I said, and we both almost laughed. "You think she was disappointed in me all those years?" he said. "I think she understood. Better than you liked," I said. "I think she loved you in a way that might feel like disappointment because you were hoping it would feel like applause." He closed his eyes for a long blink. "I don't know how to say sorry in a way that doesn't sound like I'm auditioning." "Then don't audition," I said. "Talk to me like I'm not a judge. I'm just a person who got left at an airport and keeps walking anyway. I'm sorry," he said. And it wasn't a performance. It came out stripped. Not just for the airport. For the years where I stood between you and things because I didn't get to have them when I was your age and I thought that meant nobody should. It didn't unlock the door in a rush. It didn't fix the crack. But I felt something tilt. The way a shelf eases a little when you finally loosen the screw that was too tight. After rehab, he walked a little slower, and spoke with a softness that made people lean in, which probably bothered him at first, and then secretly pleased him because some attention is better than none. He didn't become a saint. He didn't send me poems or call me to ask about my day. But he started sending me small texts like, "Will you be home Sunday?" Or, "How long do you boil corn?" The first time he wrote, "How are you?" I sat with my phone in my hand for a long minute because I hadn't planned for that role to be offered to me, and I wanted to accept it without. Putting on a costume, he and my mother shifted too. She took a job at a flower shop 2 days a week, arranging bouquets for anniversaries and apologies. She came home smelling like roses and tape. She started taking a pottery class. My father was bewildered by the vases that were too lumpy to pretend to be vases. She'd put them everywhere in the house anyway. On one of my visits, I watched him look at a crooked bowl and say, "You made that?" And she said, "Yes." And he said, "It's good." And even though it wasn't, it was. Later, she told me, "He's gentler," and I said, "So are you." And she smiled like a person who stepped into a garden and finally noticed the path. Aunt Paula never let the story die the way families sometimes do to keep the peace. She kept it alive so it wouldn't go moldy in the dark. Once, at Easter, she pulled a small box from her purse and handed it to me in front of everyone. Inside was a plane ticket stub she'd found in a cookbook at her house, probably used as a bookmark years ago. "For the shelf," she said, and I understood. Some relics you keep to remind yourself you lived through the thing you thought would end you. Years later, Isabel called me from her first apartment. "I hung the picture," she said. "What picture?" "The one of all of us in Hawaii, where the space next to Grandma is empty," she said. "I put it in a cheap frame from Target, and I hung it in the hallway, because I want to walk past it every day and remember to ask the second question. The first one is always the story somebody else is selling." "You're going to be okay," I said. "I know," she said, and I believed her. If you're looking for a moment when my father and I laughed together till we cried, you might be disappointed. Life is kinder sometimes than story, and sometimes it's stingier. Our moments were small and particular. He sent me a picture of the first tomato he grew, red and proud in his palm, and I wrote back, "How's your soil?" And he replied, "Took me a while to get it right." He came to Toma once and stood in my grandmother's backyard, his hands in his pockets, and he said, "You kept the marigolds?" And I said, "They kept me." And we left it there, on the anniversary of my grandmother's death. I drove down to Tybee and put my feet in the water. The Atlantic had its same green-gray mood. The wind was up, making the foam look like torn lace. I closed my eyes and listened. Somewhere a kid was asking for another snow cone. Somewhere a woman was swearing at her beach chair. I took the sea glass from my wallet, the piece my grandmother had given me, and held it up to the sky. Light poured through it and painted my skin a color you can only get when the world melts. Something sharp into something safe. When I got back to the motel, there was a voicemail. "My father," he said, "I drove by the airport today." There was a long pause. "They repaved the road to the long-term parking. It looks different." Another pause. "I wanted to say, I remember the shirt you wore. It was blue. Your grandmother said it brought out your eyes. You looked so happy. I'm sorry I put my foot where your heart was." It was a strange apology. It was his. I kept it. I went to the coffee shop the next morning. The ones on Main Street all have chalkboard menus and a jar by the register for a charity that changes every month. The owner knows me by the way I order, not my name. He handed me a paper cup with a sunflower drawn on it in black marker. On the bulletin board by the door, there were flyers for a dog walking service, a missing cat, and a potluck for new moms. A woman in scrubs held the door for me. I held it for the man behind me. I walked out into the day that was mine to spend. There are a lot of things people will tell you to do with old pain. Bury it, air it out, salt it like you do to a wound that needs cleaning. Some days you do one, some days another. I took my pain to the ocean and let it stand there ankle deep and learn how to lean. I took it to my grandmother's porch and fed it cookies until it stopped shaking. I took it to my father's hospital room and watched it watch him sleep. and left it there for a few minutes while I stretched my legs and bought a coffee from the vending machine. When I got home that night, the house breathed like a living thing. It had taken 1,000 breaths before me and would take 1,000 after. I slid the sea glass back into my wallet. I set the shell on the windowsill. I opened the back door, and the sound of the yard came in like a familiar voice. The marigolds were going crazy again. I knelt down in the dirt in my work pants like a person who had finally learned which stains mattered. A week later, my father called me on a Sunday. "I'm grilling," he said. The triumph in his voice was subtle but real. "Your mother says I burn the corn. Do you have advice?" "Turn it a little before you think you should," I said, "and soak it in the husk for a bit first." "I can do that," he said. We were quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I knew you'd say something useful, and it was such a naked compliment I had to sit down." Before we hung up, he said, "You should come by for dinner sometime. Bring a friend if you have one," and the stadium lights of that sentence shone on every part of me that had. Huddled in the dark? "I will," I said. "I'll bring dessert." "You always did," he said. And I could hear the smile. I don't know if we ever got all the way back to the place before the airport. Maybe there is no back. There's only forward, and it looks different than you think it will, and sometimes that's better. The last time I saw him, we sat on his porch and didn't talk about the trip. He asked me about a patient of mine as if he knew her. I asked him about a project as if I had seen the blueprint. The sun went down the way it always does in the South, slow and theatrical. I stood to leave. He stood too, a little awkward, the way men do when they're learning choreography late. He put his hand on my shoulder, then took it back, then put it there again, and this time it stayed a beat longer. "Drive safe," he said. "Text your mother when you get home, I will," I said, like a kid. And because life is never just one thing. I got in the car, and on the way out of the neighborhood, a jet passed high overhead, a silver stitch in the blue. I turned my head without thinking and followed it until the trees took it. And I thought, somewhere a man is telling himself a story about a ticket, and he believes it. Somewhere a woman is saving for a trip she doesn't plan to take. Somewhere a boy is standing in an airport, and someone is telling him to go home. And he is going to surprise them all by finding his way anyway if you want. I can tell you about the day my mother brought home a plant she had no business trying to keep alive and did it anyway. Or about the way Aunt Paula taught me to dance in the kitchen when the song was right. Or about the small ring of salt we realized we were all wearing around our hearts and how we learned to dissolve it with ordinary water. Or I can tell you about a night shift when an old woman said my grandmother's name and I didn't know whether I'd conjured it. And the way I sat with her until the sun rose and the windows turned from mirrors back into windows and the world came in. Here is what I know now. Nobody truly forgets a ticket. They forget a person, or they choose a story where that person doesn't belong. The day my father told me, "I forgot your ticket. Just go home." I learned that home is not an address you're sent to, but a place you build with the people who meet you at the door. My grandmother met me there, again and again in porches that smelled like cinnamon, on highways stitched with yellow paint, at a gray Atlantic that took and gave in the same breath. She didn't rescue me from the airport. She taught me how to keep walking. Since then, the map has redrawn itself in gentler lines. My mother found color in clay and peonies. My aunt kept courage in her glove compartment and laughter in her throat. My cousins grew into their own questions and started asking the second one. My father, wobbling on the far side of a small stroke, learned to hold a pen again, and with it, a thinner pride. We do not sit around a table and pretend none of it happened. We pass the salt and the story. Let both do their work. I keep my grandmother's sea glass in my wallet, a small green window I can hold to the light. I keep her house standing paint scraped, marigolds wild, a kettle that knows when I need the sound of water. I keep faith with the boy I was by making room for the men who walk into my clinic lost and leave knowing their names. Some days, forgiveness arrives like weather. Some days it's a chore. Either way, I do it with the door open. If you need a moral, take this. Love is not logistics. It's presence. Money can buy tickets, but only tenderness gets you through the gate. Boundaries aren't walls. They're bridges with weight limits. And a family doesn't have to be big to be true. It only has to be brave now. When a plane hums the sky over Toma, I look up and don't flinch. The sound no longer drags me backward. It threads me forward. Somewhere, a seat is empty. Somewhere else, a seat is saved. I choose the life where I save one for the next person left standing. I choose the story where I don't go home, I arrive. And the ocean waits, always patient.